Hello and good afternoon from the Regional English Language Office in Lima, Peru. I'm Micah. I'm the director of the Regional English Language Office here, and I'm very happy and fortunate to have Dr. Christine Kuhm with me this afternoon. We've funded Dr. Kuhm to be in Peru for 2 weeks to work with teachers at the Ministry of Education, with Peru TESOL, at various binational centers across Peru, and she's a well-known international expert in assessment. But today's topic, I think, will have broad appeal for all of us as professionals in teaching. She is a former TESOL president of TESOL International, and she currently lives in Dubai and is faculty at Dubai Men's College. I hope you'll join me in spirit wherever you're at, giving a warm welcome to Dr. Kuhm. And while we wait for folks around the world to tune in, I thought it would be appropriate to ask Dr. Kuhm what her general impressions are of Peru. So my first question is, have you been to Peru before?
Yes, I have, Micah. I think this is my 5th trip to Peru.
And what brings you, what brought you here before?
Well, for the most part, I've been a speaker at Peru TESOL. I've also been here a couple of times to do fundamentals of language assessment workshops, which are generally anywhere between 1 to 3 day intensive courses in language assessment. And as you know, that's what I'm doing here in a couple of the sites that you've programmed me in.
Great. And is there anything interesting that you've tried in terms of food or culture here in Peru?
Well, you know, Peru is very attractive for anyone because of the many wonderful things here. In addition to visiting Machu Picchu twice, in fact, on previous trips, I've also been lucky enough to visit Trujillo, Huancayo, and I'll be headed off in a couple of days to Ayacucho. In terms of the food, I can't say that I've had a bad meal here. I really like potatoes, and potatoes, I've learned, are very big in the Peruvian diet. One thing I'm not quite used to is eating a big meal at noon, because as you know, in American culture, our big meal is at night. So I feel I've been eating too much. I was lucky enough as well to sample the delicious avocados that are grown, of course, regionally in Huancayo.
Well, yeah, actually, Peru is world famous for its potatoes, and one of my favorite foods here are the avocados. So I'm glad you're getting some exposure to what Peru has to offer. And for those of you joining us around the world, I want you to know this is, although we're lucky to have Dr. Kuhm in Peru with us, we wanted to share this experience with all of you so that you in turn can share with your colleagues, hopefully, and we can all walk away with the common experience of community and as globalized teachers. People are starting to trickle in. We have people from all over the world who've registered. Here in the region, it's everywhere in South America, basically, somebody has signed up. But I've also noticed we have folks joining from the United States and other regions of the world, too. So without further ado, we'll get this party started.
Greetings, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I should say good afternoon because it's right after lunchtime here in Peru, but greetings to everyone who's joining us worldwide. I'm real lucky to be able to speak on a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, and that's the characteristics of highly effective English as a second or foreign language teachers. Why? Because I think every teacher, it doesn't matter where you are in the profession. You could be a veteran teacher like myself with over 20 years of experience. You could be midway in your career, or you could be just out of grad school, fresh into the classroom. Everyone wants to improve their teaching effectiveness, and certainly everyone who joins a webinar on teacher effectiveness is highly motivated to be a better teacher. It's one of the goals that teachers all over the world, and dare I say in almost all subjects, probably have. So what we're going to do in this presentation, basically, is I'm going to give you, first of all, a disclaimer in some of the assumptions that I have. Then I'm going to talk about some of the reasons out there in the literature why people become teachers in the field. Then we're going to look at various definitions of teacher effectiveness. And then finally, I'll give you what I consider to be the top 10 characteristics of being highly effective. So let's get started. First of all, I'll start with a couple of disclaimers. And first and foremost, I want to say that just because I'm here with you today talking about being a highly effective teacher does not mean that I consider myself to be highly effective. Like all of you, I have strengths in the classroom, but also like all of you, I also have areas that I need to improve. So I embarked upon the research within this presentation to find out how I could be more highly effective in the classroom. Another disclaimer is that just because the title of this presentation is 10 characteristics of being highly effective, this does not mean that there are only 10 characteristics. In fact, when I first started out with the initial research, my initial list of characteristics was 26. Well, obviously in a presentation of 1 hour or a webinar of 40 minutes, 26 is too unwieldy as a number. So I had to narrow my focus and think about what I really thought were the most important characteristics, and that's what I've done here. Now let's look at some assumptions I have coming into this presentation. Well, first of all, I feel that teaching English as a foreign or second language is distinct from other subject areas. So there might be commonalities within our content areas, but there could be distinct differences, and I feel we have to acknowledge those before we get on with the presentation. Also, as Micah explained, I am based in the Gulf, in Dubai, to be more exact. And I also say or assume that effectiveness is measured differently in my context, the Gulf, than in other contexts like Peru and wherever else everybody here is attending from. So with those disclaimers and assumptions in mind, let's move on to some of the reasons why people enter the TESOL profession. Well, these are in no order of importance or popularity except for the first one. The number one reason that people enter the TESOL or TEFL profession, according to the literature, is for altruistic reasons, or the desire to make a difference, not only in their lives, but in the lives of their students. Another common reason that people often like to be TESOL teachers is that they want to see the world. As many of you have probably experienced, going to exotic travel locations and teaching English to local populations is one of the, at least in my opinion, definite advantages of our profession. Those long summer vacations are another attractive element of our profession, and I'm really lucky to have enough time in my summer vacation, 6 weeks, to be able to spend 2 of it here with Peruvian teachers. Probably many of you are also attracted to the profession because luckily we do get longer summer vacations than most professions. Some teachers enter the teaching profession because they've been influenced by a favorite teacher in their past. And if we were here face to face, I would do a show of hands for the number of people who correspond to each of these reasons. But I'm sure that many of you out there are in the profession because of the impact of a favorite teacher in your past lives as students. The desire to be on stage is yet another reason for entering the teaching profession. In fact, there are probably, you know, maybe you are one, but there are many failed actresses, actors, and rock stars out there who desire to have an audience. And we probably can identify those individuals amongst our colleagues who have entered the teaching profession for this very reason. Life of the mind is yet another reason. And life of the mind refers to the idea that we either get into teaching or we stay in teaching because we want to surround ourselves by young people with the idea of keeping ourselves young. And I think you can all agree, at least for me, when I started teaching, I was more or less the same age as my students. But now I feel much younger, if you will, because I am surrounded by young people. And this is definitely, at least according to the literature, another reason why people go into teaching. Some of us follow in the footsteps of family members and go into the teaching profession because of family tradition. And I would imagine that many of you out there are in the profession because of this very reason. You're probably all wondering why high salary is on my list. Well, for two reasons, really. The first is, at least in Peru, we've just had a very nice lunch, a very heavy, nice lunch, and I wanted to see if you were all paying attention. The second, more important reason is that someday out there, someone in a position of authority who has the power to change things for teachers, maybe someday someone will see this and they'll think, hey, maybe we need to be paying our teachers more, or at least what they deserve. In my introduction, Micah mentioned that I served the TESOL International Association as association president from 2010 to 2013. And in that life-changing experience, one of the things I got to do was travel to many places around the world to open conferences and generally represent TESOL International. And at one such occasion during my presidential year, I was in the audience with I was giving a presentation, and one of the audience members was a luminary of TESOL, Dr. David Noonan. I'm sure many of you have heard of Dr. Noonan. He has made tremendous contributions to our field. And at the end of this slide on my presentation, David Noonan raised his hand and he said, "Christine, you've forgotten one reason." And I said, "What is that, David?" And he said, "The accidental teacher." And what he meant by being the accidental teacher is that he got into the teaching profession during his studies. He found himself in a teaching position, and he found out that he really liked it, and then he went back to school to get the requisite training to do it as a career. And I have to admit that I have always been shy of admitting that I'm an accidental teacher. So I'm now proud to admit that, and I'm sure there are many of you out there as well. Let's move on to some various definitions from stakeholder groups within education on what is a good teacher. Let's look at perspectives from administrators, educational researchers, teachers, and our students. And another disclaimer, before I get to these definitions, I'd like to note that these are not the most recent studies out there, but these are ones that resonate with me. We'd be here all day if I were to give you many, many examples, because there's a lot of literature out there on what constitutes good and highly effective teaching. I've just chosen one definition from each of these different stakeholder groups to share with you today. Let's start with the administrator's perspective. And in a 1984 study carried out by Seymour Erickson, he carried out a survey amongst educational administrators, and the result of that survey was a definition of what constitutes an outstanding teacher. And I don't know if you'll agree with me, but for me, this definition resulting from this study resonates very highly with me because it is exactly how I define effective teaching. So let me share it with you. An outstanding teacher should be an inspired instructor who is concerned about students, an active scholar who is respected by disciplined peers, and an efficient, organized professional who is accessible to both students and teachers. For me, this definition has all the components that I feel should be present in an effective teacher. Inspired instruction, concerned about students, but all the while being an active scholar, being respected and being efficient, and being accessible to colleagues, students, and other people within the educational community. I like this definition so much that I use it to frame my own self-assessment for my annual performance review. Let's move on to the educational researcher's perspective. Now, instead of a a definition, from this study conducted by Rosenshine and First, we have a list of characteristics of good teaching. I'll let you take a few seconds to look down through the list. I'm not going to talk about all the bullet points on this list. I'm just going to point to a few. Let's move down the list to the point in this list that causes the most controversy, and that's the third bullet point from the bottom. Effective teachers are not overly critical. If we were in a face-to-face environment, I might ask for some comments about criticality, because many people took umbrage about this statement. They feel that if it's not the teacher's job to be critical, whose job is it? But I feel the addition of the word overly is important here, because although teachers need to be critical, they don't need to be overcritical, because that can sometimes prove as a demotivator. So we've discussed the researcher or the administrator's perspective as well as the educational researcher perspective. Let's move on to the teacher's perspective. Now, in this breast study, the bullet points on this slide are the percentages relate to the number of times that this concept was in the top 3. So the number 1 characteristic, according to the teachers in the breast study, was that effective teachers treat students as individuals. I found this to be a very interesting one. Other important characteristics in the study were enthusiasm and inspiration. Having caring qualities is yet another important characteristic. And also, teachers value colleagues who create rich learning environments. Humor scored very highly, and spontaneity and flexibility rounded out the list. Let's move now to what our students think. And I'd like to preface this slide by saying that if any of you out there are looking for topics for dissertations or master's thesis, highly effective teaching would be a good area to study. I particularly like this study, which was a UNESCO commissioned study entitled What Makes a Good Teacher? And I like it because not only does it have a huge cohort of over 500 children from some 50 countries worldwide, what I really like about it is that is some of the propositions that these children actually came up with. I feel that there's a certain degree of sophistication in many of these concepts. So, resultant from this study, a great teacher interacts with the child, gives affection to the students or to the children, makes the students understand emotion. And again, this particular bullet point I think is telling, because I think this shows a lot of sophistication, as does the next one. An outstanding teacher smiles even when students make mistakes. Teaches not only textbook materials, but also the truth that's happening outside. And finally, dedication to the job rounds out the list. Now, if you'd like to read the whole study, it's an interesting study to read. All you have to do is Google What Makes a Good Teacher, 1996 UNESCO, and it should come right up. I encourage you to do that if you have further interest in this research topic. Before I go to the list of my top 10, I'd like to turn over to Micah, who has a few questions for you, so we can know who you are and what you think about certain topics. Micah?
Yeah, so thanks, Dr. Coombe. I'm going to put on your screen a few questions. Please click on which answer best meets who you are and what your situation is, and then we'll share the results with you momentarily. Okay, we'll give you 10 more seconds. 5, 4, 3, still have time. 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to close the poll. And let's look at the results. So over half of you identify as teaching secondary students, nearly 40% college/university or adult education, and about 10% primary. And just a disclaimer, this is about 75% of you attending were able to vote. So thank you for giving that feedback.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so the next question we're going to ask you is, what is a characteristic of an effective teacher? Now, Dr. Koom has gone over what the research indicates, but we would like to know what your opinion is. So please help us out by clicking on the answer you identify with best. Okay, we'll give 10 more seconds here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and we'll share the data with you. All right, perhaps unsurprisingly, a lot of you, the majority, 75%, indicate that good communication skills are a characteristic of an effective teacher. Second highest is knowledge of teaching, knowing about the English language and what's involved in teaching it, which could be somewhat different from the knowledge of English as the language itself. And then finally, a good personality. All right, thank you for sharing that with us.
Those were some very interesting results. In fact, 45% of you basically said that knowledge of English was important. Before I get to my list of what I consider to be the top 10 characteristics, I'd like to share with you something very interesting within the literature. And this is effectiveness not only within the English language teaching arena, but effectiveness overall in other content areas. One of the interesting findings within teacher effectiveness is that when you ask most teachers what are the most important characteristics, they almost all leave out knowledge of the content area they're teaching, which is in our case English. I'm glad some of you recognize that knowledge of the English language was indeed important. Now obviously the list that we gave you in the poll is not exhaustive, but we tried to think of a good cross-section of factors that have been found to be important within the literature. Most of them I will include in my own list. So let's get down to my top 10. And again, they're in no particular order except for number 1. For me, having a calling to the profession is the most important characteristic that I feel teachers have to have. Teachers have to be driven and passionate about the profession, or if they don't have this calling, they find it difficult to survive a phenomenon that happens to many educators, which is burnout. I'm sure many of you have heard of the term burnout. This is basically, well, it can evolve into a medical condition, and it happens, unfortunately, with professions that work with people. And as you all know, teaching is one of the top 5 professions that has the potential to where the people who practice it, the teachers, have problems with burnout. So if you have this calling to the profession, it's been found that you will survive or avoid burnout a lot better than if you didn't. So I feel having a call to teach and a passion to help students learn and grow is essential for us. Because without this calling, teaching is just another job and a very difficult one at that. Number 2 on my list is professional knowledge. And you all know that there's lots of disturbing research out there about teacher deficiencies. And there's that old adage that, quite frankly, I find insulting. which is those who can do, those who can't teach. For me, and I'm biased of course, teaching is, I feel, one of the most important professions out there. But I find it very important that the people who practice this profession have the right credentials and sound professional knowledge if they want to be highly effective. And for me, that means having the right credentials. In my part of the world, to be an English language teacher at the university level, you have to have a master's in TESOL or applied linguistics and 3 years of prior teaching experience at the same level. And I'm proud to say that institutions in the Gulf, and the UAE in particular, they're very strict about this. If you don't have these minimal credentials, you are not even considered for a job. In many other parts of the world, institutions are often lax on this. And in, unfortunately, some parts of the world, you only have to speak English to be able to teach it. For me, this is a very dangerous phenomenon. It's like saying, you know, if you know a little bit of biology, you can be a practicing surgeon. Although the stakes are not as high with the medical profession versus teaching, it is still the same idea. So credentials for me are very important. Recognizing the importance of ongoing professional development is yet another important point. I feel that, well, one of the reasons that probably teachers like their profession is that it always focuses on lifelong learning. So recognizing that once you have your terminal degree, whether it be a bachelor's, a master's, or a doctorate, that is just the beginning of the learning you will be doing. And I'm so proud of all the important programs that the U.S. State Department engages in with people all over the world to help enhance their professional development. And I feel IT and technology skills are a third must, basically, for teachers nowadays. In my particular context, which is, I'm proud to say, highly technological, we have to have IT skills, because if you refuse to, you know, jump on the bandwagon with technology, you will definitely be left behind. So for me, professional knowledge includes the right qualifications, the importance of and the engagement in ongoing professional development, and having good IT or technology skills. Personality qualities are also high on the list. Now, 2 quotes have influenced my thinking about the importance of personality with teaching. The first comes to us from Kopej and Schreck. Teachers who were identified by students as changing their lives were rarely praised for their knowledge of the subject matter, teaching methods, or materials. Those were all givens in the students' minds. What really mattered to students were the teacher's human qualities. Now, I find this interesting, but as I look back through my own student evaluations of teaching, you know, usually institutions, at least where I live, conduct student evaluations of teaching. And that's where the students answer a few Likert scale questions about your teaching, but they also have the opportunity to write out some comments. And typical questions on SETs are, what do you like about the teacher and what could the teacher do to improve? Well, when I go back and look at my student evaluations, particularly those comments, there is not one student who says, Miss Christine speaks English very well or uses a wide variety of teaching methods, etc. Most of the comments, if not all relate to my personality, what they like or dislike about my personality. So if you keep your student evaluations of teaching, I encourage you to go back and see what percentage of those comments actually relate to personality factors. Let's look at the next quote. Effective teachers don't necessarily need a flamboyant, entertaining style to be memorable and influential. Sometimes they just have to be sympathetic and encouraging. Now, I was always a bit nervous about my own teaching because I'm pretty serious, I have to admit, and I'm definitely not one of those people who got into teaching because I like to be on stage. I don't consider myself flamboyant or entertaining. But when I read this study conducted by McEwen, two of the strengths I have, I feel, is that I am sympathetic or empathetic, and I am encouraging. So I found a lot out of this study. Now, the research base on this very topic, on what is known as highly facilitative teachers versus low facilitative teachers, found that if you were a highly facilitative teacher, which means you have high degrees of empathy and caring for your students, that your students make greater gains on academic achievement, they do better academically, and they create fewer disciplinary problems. I feel that this is a win-win for the highly facilitative teacher. And the result was a book that I wish I had written. Don't you just love this title? Kids don't learn from people they don't like. And I think that is just so, so true. So personality is an important issue. What are the most important personal or personality qualities for teachers in our field? Well, rounding out the list, being caring and empathetic. Another interesting research is conducted on the idea of fairness. And what was found in several studies is that students forgive their teachers for many, many things. They forgive us if we're late. They forgive us if we promise to have their papers graded and back to them and we don't have time to do it. They forgive many, many things, but the one thing they never forgive us for, almost never forgive us for, is if they perceive us to be unfair. And being unfair means more than just giving, it just means more than just grading. It means things like always putting the same students as group leaders, always making eye contact with the same students, etc. And in fact, research on how teachers treat low achievers tells us that there are a number of characteristics that teachers might often use that could be deemed unfair by many students. So one thing I really learned from conducting this literature review is that some of my practices were deemed unfair. So this is one thing that doing the research for this presentation has changed in my teaching. Some of the other important characteristics include being respectful. And by respectful, I mean mutual respect. Respect teachers towards students and students towards teachers. Being fun, having a sense of humor, and having a personal, unique style are ones that round out the list empirically of the most important personal or personality qualities for teachers in our field. Number 4 on my list is a term that was coined by McEwen, and that's the term of with-itness. With-itness, as defined by McEwen, is basically the state of being on top of things, tuned in to the teaching and learning environment, and in control of the various facets of our classroom and of our jobs as a whole. What are some of the most important characteristics therein? Well, being able to manage and organize your classroom, being able to keep up and maintain student engagement, keeping up the momentum of your teaching. Time management. Again, we all know as teachers that time management is one of those things that are very important. Now, at the writing of this book, the ability to multitask was high on McEwen's list. And I think we all agree that teachers, we're fairly good multitaskers. But let me caution you on the research with regard to multitasking. I think there's a lot of research out there that is not necessarily complementary to multitasking. So it's important maybe to think about keeping that one on the list. So according to McEwen, a with-it teacher is one who can adapt to the changing needs and demands of our job and of our profession. Number 5 is instructional effectiveness. One of my projects in 2008 was the editing of a book on leadership skills for English language teachers. And when I was coming up with the topics that I thought needed to be covered in that book and the commissioning of chapters, one of the areas I thought was very important was recruiting. So I thought teacher leaders needed to have recruiting skills because one of their jobs might be to actually hire teachers in the future. So I commissioned 2 well-known educationalists within the UAE to write this chapter. And one of the things that they said in this chapter is that when they recruited teachers, they looked at whether the teachers had the requisite qualifications, and they said that if the teachers passed initial screening, that being a good teacher was a given. And the more I think about this, the more I think, is this really true? Well, being a good teacher, being able to teach, has been shown to be important within the literature base, because study after study confirms that students who have high quality teachers make better and longer lasting learning gains. Also, students with less effective teachers are always behind and have to play a constant academic game of catch up. So within North American research, most definitely having high quality teachers consistently tops the list from parents who are looking for schools for their children. But going back to being a good teacher is a given, it's important to think of, because when I think about, I work with a wonderful group of colleagues, but I have worked with people in the past who, despite, when you're in your first year of teaching, obviously you will make mistakes. Now, during your second year of teaching, hopefully you will learn from the mistakes you made during your first year and move on from them. Now, in your second year, you might make other mistakes, but you continually learn from them. So there's the old adage of, does a teacher have 20 years of experience, or do they have 1 year of experience 20 times? I think you'll be able to figure out what I'm getting at here. So I think even if you have the right qualifications and the right years of experience, being a good teacher is not necessarily a given, for me at least, because I know plenty of teachers who have that 1 year of experience 20 times and who continually make the same mistakes they made during their first year of teaching and never really get past those mistakes. So instructional effectiveness, number 5 on my list. In our polling question, the top characteristic that you all chose was good communication skills. And sure enough, being a good communicator is a very important component on my list. I feel that to be highly effective, you need to be good communicators, because you'll have a lot of different arenas to communicate in. First of all, you need to be able to articulate your ideas, talk about issues within the field, discuss your beliefs and values about teaching with a number of different stakeholders, including your colleagues, your administrators, etc. Because we play many roles within our job, again, we're teachers, sometimes we're facilitators, other times we're counselors, advisors, and sometimes, hopefully not a lot of times, sometimes I feel I'm a mere babysitter. So we have lots of roles that we play within our jobs, and we have to be skilled at conflict resolution, because we find ourselves in many situations, not only just teaching within our jobs. Again, I'm probably one of the few attending this webinar who remembers the days before email. Now, of course, email occupies a really big time of, a really huge portion of my day. And I think these days you have to be an active emailer. The days before emails, we used to communicate through memos that were placed in our pigeonhole, and also through telephone calls and messages. So back in those days, when you got a memo in your pigeonhole, you had about 1 day to answer it. Now, however, with email, I work in an environment where I'm lucky because all teachers and students have computers and our campus is entirely wireless. Now, if I get an email from my supervisor, if I haven't answered it in 15 minutes, he's on the phone saying, "Didn't you get my email?" So now the expectation for communicating faster, I think, is out there. Finally, public speaking and presentation skills are important for highly effective teachers to have. For me, my life changed with an organization called Toastmasters. Toastmasters is an international organization that helps people from all over the world in all walks of life develop public speaking and leadership skills. I've been through the entire range of qualifications with Toastmasters, and I initially joined Toastmasters because I thought, well, I wanted to have a club at my college, and I have to admit that when I went to that first meeting, my life was changed. So I encourage you, if you want to develop more presentation skills or better public speaking skills, to actually go to one of the meetings. Street Smarts is yet another characteristic on my list. Street smarts means you have knowledge about the students, the school, the community, and the culture in which you live and teach, and you use that knowledge to solve problems. Being politically savvy, being familiar with your institutional culture, knowing which materials and which topics to avoid in different cultures is important information to have. And finally, knowing which battles to fight. Some, of course, you will not win. A willingness to go the extra mile is number 8 on my list. And if many of you are thinking about doing a self-evaluation of your own characteristics, for me, I would say that my strength within teaching is definitely number 8. I believe in my ability to make a difference. I have high expectations of my students, and I'm willing to inspire and motivate them through example. So I would give myself high marks on number 8. So might many of you out there. Being a lifelong learner is number 9 on my list. I feel that effective teachers are concerned with not only their professional development, but their self and personal development as well. They are reflective. The more conferences and trainings that I attend, the more I keep hearing about reflection and the importance of reflection in being an effective teacher. I also feel that having a strategic professional development or career plan is important. In fact, I firmly believe in personal strategic planning, and I feel that I would never have been able to reach my goal of being TESOL president without strategically planning on how to get there. Now, for many of you, assuming a leadership position in your institution or in another institution might be the logical next step in your career. And as McEwen points out, if you can lead in the classroom, you can lead anywhere. And I think she's right, because I think with all the issues that we navigate within our jobs on a daily basis, it puts us in a great position to be teacher leaders. Number 10 on my list is having a life outside the classroom. And as self-evaluations go, whereas I put myself high marks with number 8, I think I have failing marks with life outside the classroom. There are plenty of sources out there that cite how important it is to be not too consumed by your job. And virtually all the self-help literature out there shows us that people who have hobbies, who have things that they regularly engage in outside of their job, suffer from less stress and less depression. So my advice to you is, if you suffer from this same problem, find something else that defines you outside of the workplace. The theory behind this is if you go and you do things for yourself over the weekend or in the evenings when you're outside of work, it will de-stress you, and then once you go back to the office on whatever morning you go back to the office on, you will be less stressed and be actually more productive. So there you have it, my top 10. Again, if we were in a face-to-face environment, I would ask for other things, but hopefully you can send some of those in the comments or the questions at the end. So for a few closing thoughts, I feel that it's important that teachers, that you don't feel that you can be perfect in every area. You can't be all things to all people. And I think you can't be uniformly strong in all of the areas. It will be up to you to decide which of these traits or others that you might think are most important to you. And I hope that you will look at this as a self-evaluation and see where your areas of strengths are and identify possible areas of weakness that you might have, or areas that you need to improve, and to strategically work on those areas. I think on this last slide I have my email. If you need to contact me outside of the webinar, I'd be happy to answer any queries or hear any comments you might have. Right now I'd like to hand over to Micah, who'd like to give you some information about all the great programs that the U.S. State Department English Language Office has to offer.
Yeah, first, Dr. Coombe, thank you so much for your time with us. It's been a pleasure. I've learned a lot just sitting next to you and listening. I have some homework to do. I would like to share with you another question for all of you joining us about where you can find free resources for teaching. Please take a moment to complete this survey and we'll share the results with you. So the first choice is americanenglish.state.gov. American English at State, which is a Facebook page that you're welcome to join. And if you like it, you'll get updates and feeds on future webinars and all the free resources that are available. And then what we have here at the U.S. Embassy is a RELO Andes Facebook page, which I encourage you all to like, even if you are not part of, you don't live in South America, that's fine. We like friends. And our team, Marcella and Ricardo, do a great job of putting information out there about upcoming webinars. So I encourage you to consider checking these sources out. And I'll share the results with you here. Okay, so 66% know about at least americanenglish.state.gov. That's probably your best one-stop free shopping. On there you'll find our forum magazine, which has articles written by teachers for teachers. It has all of our past webinars from Shaping the Way We Teach English, and in the future the name will be American English Webinar Series. It also has information about educational exchange opportunities for teachers and students, and it's a great place to keep checking because content is updated weekly. Also, if you go to the Facebook page, American English at State, which 50% of you know about, it has some of the latest and greatest stuff. And actually, that's the site that's updated weekly. The americanenglish.state.gov is updated as new material is produced. And then finally, the RELO Andes page, I'm happy to see that 61% of you think that might be a good place to go. And then finally, I want you to have the contact information for reaching RELO Andes. Once again, I'm Micah Risher. I'm the director of the office, and you can join us on RELO Andes at Facebook. We also have Twitter feeds. Just one more shout out to Dr. Coombe. Thank you so much